My name is Connolly Ryan, and I'm a professor in the Honors College. Alrighty. I am introducing tonight's speaker, Jhally. Plato's allegory of the nutshell in a cave. That is, Plato's allegory of the cave in a nutshell is about a man who escapes the shackles anchoring him to subterraneous darkness and who climbs out of his cave only to be stunned blind by the brusque impact of sunlight upon his inexperienced gaze. After the initial blast of light, however, the man gradually acclimates to the visuals of his new environs and is amazed by how much definition and nuance, newly unveiled, is now available to him. Giddy with elation and in a spirit of camaraderie, he eventually descends back into the cave and attempts to convey to his imprisoned companions the marvelous inventory of illuminated details and delights he had just witnessed. He explains that the world inside the cave is but a poor, shadowy substitute for the reality that radiated just beyond their reach. Alas, his beleaguered colleagues, resenting such an inconvenient divulgement, arrive at the most pragmatic conclusion they can muster. They want to kill him. Of all the metaphorical parables that have found the light of print, Plato's cave is hands down the most timeless and ever relevant of the bunch. And out of all the visionary documentarians and producers thereof who have graced our screens since the beginnings of cinema, Professor Jhally has been the most prolifically dedicated chronicler of the Plato's cave phenomenon, namely the trajectory from dark to light, from ignorance to knowledge, from oblivion to revelation, from indifference to resistance. Every time I finish watching one of the films he has helped to bring to light, I am consistently left with a queasy, sinking feeling, accentuated by flashes of subtle yet vital empowerment. Whenever I discuss these films with my students, they too confess to experiencing an odd mix of nausea and reassurance, a signature sensation that I have since diagnosed as the birthing pains of necessary insight. An author of multiple books and scholarly articles, the founder and executive director of the Media Education Foundation, which has generated over 40 documentaries from topics ranging from the media's dysfunctional and often nefarious relation to gender, nostalgia, violence, sexuality, racism, and consumerism, to name just a few. Jhally is a masterful navigator through the seething whitewater of media literacy. But whether he is lecturing with scathing clarity about desire, sex, and power in music video culture, or extrapolating artfully on the predatory storytelling of pervasive advertising, as I believe he will be doing this evening, I think I can speak for millions of people when I say that Jhally has played a pivotal role in galvanizing a resolve to cultivate genuine convictions in a nation that is increasingly content to play the role of passive spectator as consumer mania continues to blur the line between buying and being, between compliance and defiance, between playing along and paying attention, indeed between normalcy and lunacy. So without further adulation, please give a critically thoughtful welcome to Professor Jhally.
How on earth is anyone supposed to follow up that introduction? That may be the single best introduction I've ever had. Actually, I must probably just finish right now on a high point. I'm very pleased. It's Plato's cave coming back. I'm very pleased to be here and to such a large audience. I actually don't think I've been at the university for 26 years now, and actually I don't think I've ever lectured in this room, so this is a first for me. I may have introduced someone in this room, but I've never actually lectured in it, so we'll see. You've got the title of my talk. In my remarks today, I wish to make a modest claim. 20th century advertising is the most powerful and sustained system of propaganda in human history. And its cumulative cultural and political effects, unless quickly checked, will be responsible for destroying the world as we know it. The principal reason, and the topic of my talk, is that the cultural system of advertising threatens to destroy the very thing, a sense of human connection, of human community, and care for something beyond the individual. That is the basis of our incredible accomplishments as a species. In the process, am I going in and out here? I'm going to just go with, I'm going to go with the mic, with the, okay. Okay. In the process of achieving this, the masters of the advertising system, global corporations bent on nothing but private profit, will be responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of non-Western people. In addition, the peoples of the world will be prevented from achieving true happiness. Simply stated, our survival as a species is dependent upon minimizing the threat from advertising and the commercial culture that has spawned it. As I said, it's a modest claim. Now, I'm stating my claims boldly at the outset so there can be no doubt as to what is at stake in our debates about the media and culture as we enter the new millennium. Okay, what is the basis of my, you're already looking at me strange, I know, from this. My job is to convince you actually that what I just said is actually perfectly normal. It's actually perfectly rational. That's what I'm going to spend about an hour trying to do. What is the basis of my outrageous claims about the power of advertising? Well, firstly, I would just point out the incredible presence that advertising and commercial messages have in our culture. Ads are everywhere. Commercial speech is everywhere, and they are colonizing more and more space by the hour. And I use the term colonizing deliberately. Colonizing means moving into places it wasn't before, displacing what was there. And commercial speech, of which advertising is the main form, is moving into every nook and cranny of the culture. It is now almost impossible to escape. For instance, let me give you some examples. For instance, the entire media system, television and print, have been developed as a delivery system for marketers. The prime function of our media is not to produce programs for us. The prime function of our media is to produce us as commodities for sale to advertisers. Why do I say that? Look at where the money comes from. For television, 100% of the money comes from advertisers. In magazines, it's about 80% comes from advertisers. In newspapers, it's about between 50 and 70% comes from advertisers. That's what the media system are. They are a delivery system of our consciousness to advertisers. The movie system, at one time thought to be outside the direct influence of the broader marketing system, is now fully integrated into it through the strategies of licensing, tie-ins, and product placements. The prime function of many Hollywood films now is to aid in the selling of the immense accumulation of commodities that modern capitalism has produced. As public funds are drained from the non-commercial sector, art galleries, museums, and even symphonies bid for corporate sponsorship. Even those institutions once thought to be outside the market are now being sucked in. High schools now sell the sides of their buses, the spaces of their hallways, and the classroom time of their students to hawkers of candy bars, soft drinks, and jeans. In the contemporary world, everything is sponsored by someone. The latest plans of corporations, they're looking at the skies in envious ways. And the latest plans even call for the marketing of space. And there is one company called Space Marketing Incorporated that are developing plans for rockets to deliver mile-wide mylar billboards to compete with the sun and the moon for the attention of the Earth's population. If you think I'm kidding, here's a new story about it.
Launch a rocket, send it 200 miles into orbit, deploy a mylar billboard, and inflate it with compressed gas. The mylar billboard would measure about 2/3 of a mile across and 1/4 mile tall. From Earth, it might appear about half the size of the moon, the company originally said, and envisioned charging $20 to $30 million to whatever corporation might care to buy space.
The PepsiCo company is already investigating how to put their logo through lasers on the surface of the moon, so that when we look at the moon, it's such a waste. I mean, from a viewpoint of marketing, the sky is a waste. The moon is a waste because that is a marketing moment that is not being taken advantage of. Actually, the Pizza Hut has already put its logo on the side of the Russian space shuttle that has gone up. So the marketing of space is already, this is not something for the future, it is already happening. There is an ad agency that specializes in placing ads in public bathrooms, above urinals, etc. I guess if you're looking for the perfect captive audience, that is it. And a few years ago, the Bamboo lingerie company, actually from the skies to the floor. A few years ago, the Bamboo lingerie company launched this campaign on the pavement of Manhattan through spray paint. So as from here, it looks like you could use some new underwear. And believe me, if I could go on for an hour about the different ways that advertising is spreading into colonizing every nook and cranny of the culture. It shouldn't be surprising then that many commentators now, myself included, identify the realm of culture as simply an adjunct to the system of production and consumption. Our culture is nothing but marketing. That is its function. That is how it's being designed. Why should this be so? The answer, of course, lies not in the power of advertising in isolation, but in the realm of capitalist production, which revolutionized how human beings interacted with the physical world around them. Indeed, no other system, no other society in history has been able to match the immense productive output of capitalism. Capitalism just produces more stuff. That was the great revolution. That was the great capitalist revolution. And this fact, the fact of the production of stuff, the production of things, this feature colors the way in which the society presents itself, the way in which it appears. Objects and commodities are everywhere in capitalism. In that sense, capitalism is truly a revolutionary society, dramatically altering the very landscape of social life in a way that no other form of social organization had been able to achieve in such a short time. In fact, when you think of who the greatest critic of capitalism was, when you think of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, actually when you read, and I would recommend that you do, when you read the Communist Manifesto, and it is as relevant today as it ever was, when you read the Communist Manifesto, it's tough to figure out if Marx and Engels are capitalism's greatest critics, which is how they're often viewed, or capitalism's greatest fans. Because Marx and Engels loved the revolutionary dynamic of capitalism. And they coined the famous phrase, this is a Marx and Engels phrase, all that is solid melts into air. to highlight capitalism's unique dynamism. And the reason why Marx and Engels are in love with this dynamism is you need this dynamism to destroy feudalism and all those old oppressions of the past. To have the new possibility of democratic socialism in the future, you need to destroy what has happened in the past. And capitalism did that. Capitalism, through its dynamism, destroyed those old forms and set the basis, they hoped, for what would truly follow, which would be a truly democratic society. And in fact, this feature of capitalism is reflected in the opening lines of Marx's major work, which is Capital. I've always been struck, these are the opening lines to Capital, which is focusing on the capitalist revolution. Okay, this is Marx talking about, this is the opening sentences, the opening sentence of Capital. Marx says, the wealth of societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails appears as an immense collection of commodities. Actually, he's put immense collection of commodities is in quotes, because he's quoting himself from something he wrote a few years ago. That's how central he regards the capitalist, the nature of the capitalist revolution. It just produces stuff in a way that had never even been contemplated before. So in initially seeking to distinguish what was different about the system he was looking at, capitalism, from what appeared before, he focused on this quantitative dimension, the number of things that it produces. Of course, it is not only enough to produce the immense collection of commodities, they must also be sold. If you can't sell what has been produced, then the system will stagnate into depression straight away. You've got to be able to, you've made this investment in products, you've produced all this stuff, you've got to be able to sell it. In that sense, capitalism has to ensure the sale of commodities on pain of death. On pain of death. Unless it sells what it has produced, unless it sells the immense accumulation of commodities, the game will be over. And in that sense, the major problem for capitalism is not the problem of production. That's been solved. The major problem for capitalism is the problem of consumption. So central is consumption to its survival and growth that at the end of the 19th century, industrial capitalism invents a unique new institution. They invent the advertising industry to ensure that the immense accumulation of commodities are converted back into a money form. The function of this new industry, the function of the advertising industry, will be to create a culture in which desire and identity would be fused with commodities, to make the dead world of things, to make the immense accumulation of commodities come alive with human and social possibilities. It's what Marx called, prophetically, the fetishism of commodities. We have to make a fetish. We have to make a fetish of commodities. And indeed, there has never been a propaganda effort to match the effort of advertising in the 20th century. More thought, more effort, more creativity, more time, more attention to detail has gone into the selling of the immense accumulation of commodities than any other campaign in human history to change public consciousness. Okay, we may be able to argue about the impact of religion over time as competing in terms of the amount of effort that has gone into trying to transform and transform human consciousness. But even then, I would argue for advertising. One indication of this is simply the amount of amount of money that has been exponentially expended on this effort. Today, in the United States, over $200 billion a year is spent just on advertising. That's not including all the media, all the public relations, everything else, just on the advertising. Globally, that figure is now close to $500 billion. This concentration of effort is unprecedented. And these messages, these advertising messages, they're not just like any other message. More care, more resources are poured into the creation of commercial messages than the fluff that surrounds them. On television, advertising costs about 10 times as much per second than the programming that surrounds it. That is where all the creative effort has gone. If you want to really think about the creative focus in advertising, there's a lot of fuss made every summer when the big Hollywood blockbusters come out. Whether it was Jurassic Park a few years ago, or Star Wars, or whatever else. Well, think about every ad having that amount of creative effort devoted to it. And we don't even think about it. We don't even think about these things as they float in our commercial cultures. This discourse, this advertising discourse, does it have an effect? It would be crazy not to think of it as having an effect. Does culture have an effect? Of course culture has an effect. And our advertising has become the culture. Okay, from a diamond is forever. That idea, diamond is forever, now structures how we think about courtship rituals and marriage. It is an advertising campaign. I can tell you exactly where that idea came from. It was 1947 in the offices of the NWA's advertising company on Madison Avenue. And it was designed as a way to sell us these things, diamonds, which the beers who controlled it had tons of, to somehow convince us that we should be spending huge amounts of money on these worthless diamonds, on these worthless stones that they controlled. From a diamond is forever to a situation, to a world where Ronald McDonald now rivals Santa Claus in the consciousness of kids, and where the Golden Arches rival the Christian cross. This commercial culture, this commercial discourse is the ground on which we live. It is the space in which we learn to think. It is the lens through which we come to understand the world that surrounds us. And in seeking to understand where we're headed, if you want to understand where we're headed as a culture, if you don't have a perspective on this aspect of the culture, you are incapable of understanding what is going to happen in the future. It's not the only thing, but if you don't understand the main aspect of the culture, you're not going to be able to tell us very much, or your analysis is not going to reveal very much. Unless you do that, any theory, any critical theory of modern society will remain impotent and marginal. Now, I hope I've convinced you now. That's why we should focus on advertising. It is everywhere. Huge amounts of money are expended on it. It has reached deep into our consciousness, deep into our culture, deep into our ideas about who we are and how the society should be organized. If I've convinced you of that, then the next question is, okay, how then do we understand it? How then do we come to really ask the right question? And this means we have to really focus on the right question. And if you have the wrong question to start off with, you could spend a lifetime studying it, and it will tell you nothing. You've got to figure out what the right question is. And for too long, I think we have asked the wrong question. This is the wrong question. The wrong question is a particular campaign for Pepsi-Cola or Budweiser or whatever, does that campaign increase sales of that product? And if it increases sales, then advertising is powerful. If it doesn't, then it's not very powerful. And I think it's the wrong question. If you're Pepsi, it's the right question. You want to know how your advertising is being used. If you're Budweiser, that is the right question. But if you're interested in the social effect of advertising, in the social power of advertising, then that, I would argue, is the wrong question. The correct question, the right question for me, the right way to approach this actually is from a cultural perspective. And it's to ask questions about the cultural role of advertising, not its narrow marketing role. For me, this is my definition of culture. Culture is the place and space where a society tells stories about itself. It is a space where values are articulated and expressed, where notions of good and evil, of morality and immorality are defined. That's what a culture is, it's those stories. And in our culture, it is the stories of advertising that dominates the spaces that give an answer to those questions. If human beings are essentially a storytelling species, then to study advertising in the modern world is to examine the central storytelling mechanism of our society. the central storytelling mechanism of our society. The correct question then to ask from this perspective is not whether particular ads sell the products they're hawking, but what are the consistent stories that advertising spins as a whole about what is important in the world? What does it tell us about how to behave? What does it tell us about good and bad? What does it tell us about which values we should value? If you then look at this incredible, complex world from that perspective, actually, I think it allows you to start making things a little bit simpler. What stories does it tell? And actually, I think, and now I'm going to I've argued for a long time about the complexity of this world, but I actually think looking at advertising is actually, the basic story that advertising tells is fairly simple. Advertising tells us a story, almost every ad actually. I'll say almost because it's too big a world to, but almost every ad tells us a story about individual happiness. The cultural system of advertising tells us the way to happiness and satisfaction is through the consumption of objects through the marketplace. Commodities will make us happy. People used to say commodities will make you popular. In the modern world, and for a long time, it's actually commodities will make you happy. And in one sense, that is the consistent and explicit message of every single ad within the system of market communication. I'll just show you one ad that highlights this. It's tough to pick one ad that then represents the millions that are produced every year, but I think actually this goes to the heart.
1 hour.
And I urge you, be on time.
Urge?
And extrapolate that to the whole of the messages that we see. That is what products will do. They will make us deliriously happy. In fact, we're encouraged to have deep and intimate relationships with things. Actually, we're encouraged to think of things as more important than people. I really hope the sound of this next clip. Let me just see it.
She's a real beauty, and she never bugs you about spending so much time with the guys. She never complains about you watching football. She thinks a little gas is a good thing. Maybe she isn't a she after all. Here's to the perfect relationship. Here's how to keep it that way.
Here's to the perfect relationship, and that relationship is with, human relationships are so messy. They are so messy. It's much, much easier to have deep connections with something else that is much simpler, which is products. So economic growth, why the economy needs to grow. Economic growth is justified not simply on the basis that it will provide employment. After all, a host of alternative activities can provide employment. The reason we need to make the economy grow is not just because of jobs, but because this is part of the overall argument, because having access to more things will make us happy. More things, the marketplace, what the marketplace provide is at the center of human satisfaction. And this rationale, I believe, for the existing system is the rationale for the system of ever expanding, ever increasing production. And it is told by advertising in the most compelling forms, and it is told by advertising in every nook and cranny of the culture. Things will make us happy. Things will make us happy. In fact, I would argue it is this story that human satisfaction is intimately connected to the provisions of the market, to economic growth. There is the major motivating force for social change on a global scale at the start of the 21st century. Now the question, I'm going to ask a heretical question now. And a heretical question is the one you can't ask, because if the answer is not what it's supposed to be, then everything falls apart. And And the heretical question to ask about this issue, about this equation between happiness and things, the question to ask is it true? Does happiness come from material things? Do we get happier as a society as we get richer, as our standard of living increases, as we have more access to the immense accumulation, the immense collection of commodities? And this is actually an empirically testable question. As a society gets richer, as we have access to more things, as our standard of living increases as a whole, is there greater satisfaction within the society? Now, these are obviously complex issues, but they're not that complex, to tell you the truth. And the general answer to that question about whether there's a connection between happiness and things, the general answer to that question is no. In a series of surveys conducted in the United States starting in 1945, very interesting surveys are going on to the present day called the happiness surveys, researchers sought to examine the link between material wealth and its subjective happiness, and concluded that when you look at it both historically and cross-nationally, that there is a very weak relationship, a very weak correlation between wealth and happiness. Okay, why should this be so? Why should this be? This seems counterintuitive. This seems to be a paradox. But when we examine things more closely, the conclusions, I don't think, are that surprising. In another series of surveys called the Quality of Life surveys, people were asked about the kinds of things that are important to them. That is, what would constitute a good life? What would constitute a good quality of life? And the findings of this research indicate that if the elements of satisfaction were divided up into social values are things like love, like family, like friends, like connections, that's social values, and material values, economic security and success. You obviously need both. But if you divide it up in that way, then in fact social values far outrank material values above a certain level of poverty as being able to provide satisfaction and happiness. What people say they want out of life this actually shouldn't be, if you ask yourself, is autonomy and control of life. We want to be in control of our lives. We want to feel good about ourselves. We want warm family relationships. We want tension-free leisure time. We want close and intimate friends. We want romantic love. We want intimacy. We want connection. We want sociability. So that's not to say material things are not important. Right? They obviously are. They form a necessary component of a good quality of life. But above a certain level of poverty and comfort, material things simply stop giving us the kinds of satisfactions that the magical world of advertising insists they can deliver. These conclusions point to one of the great ironies, one of the great paradoxes of the market system. The market is good at providing those things that can be bought and sold. And it has pushed us, through advertising, in that direction. It has pushed us towards commodities. But the real sources of happiness, social relationships, are outside of the capability of the marketplace to provide. The marketplace cannot provide love. The marketplace cannot provide real friendships. The marketplace cannot provide sociability. It can provide other material things and services, but they are not what makes us happy. The advertising industry actually has known this since at least the 1920s, and in fact have stopped trying to sell us things based on their material qualities alone. If we look at the advertising of the 20th century, we'll see that actually in the first decade or so of the 20th century, advertising talked a great deal about products, about things, about how things were made and what they did, etc. But starting in around the 1920s, advertising shifts to talking about the relationship of things to what it is that people actually want. It starts to connect commodities, the things they have to sell, with the powerful images of a deeply desired social life that people say they want. No wonder then that advertising is so attractive to us, so powerful, so seductive. What it offers us are the images of the real sources of human satisfaction. Okay, if you looked at advertising and said, okay, let's forget it's about products for a second, what else are they trying to sell? What you'd see are images of family life, images of romance and love, images of sexuality and pleasure and intimacy, images of friendship and sociability, images of leisure and relaxation, images of independence and control of life. That's why advertising is so powerful, and that is what is real about it. It taps into what we really want. The cruel illusion, of course, of advertising is the way that it links those qualities to a place that by definition cannot provide it. It links those things to the market and the immense collection of commodities. So there is something true and something false about advertising. The falsity of advertising is not in the appeals it makes, which are very real, but in the answers it provides. We want love and friendship and sociability and sexuality, and advertising points the way to it through objects. As ad executive Jerry Goodis puts it, if I only had one quote that I had to use to indicate how advertising works, this would be it. It says, advertising doesn't mirror how people are acting, but how they are dreaming. It taps into our real emotions. It taps into it. It's a dream. Advertising is the dream life of the culture. It taps into those things that actually really do motivate us. Actually, even saying this simplifies actually a complex process, because advertisers do more than just mirror our dream life. They help to create it. They translate our desires for love, for family, for friendship, for adventure, for sex. They translate those desires into our dreams. Advertising in that sense is like a fantasy factory, taking our desire for real, for human social contact, reconceiving it, reconceptualizing it, and connecting it with a world of commodities. Okay, it's both, when you start looking at advertising, it is both true and false. If there wasn't something real, if there wasn't something true about it, it wouldn't work. If there wasn't something that actually hooked us in, if there wasn't something that reflected what our real human desires were, it wouldn't work. So it has to do that, as well as at the same time perform its function of selling the immense accumulation of commodities. In this sense, okay, if I had to come up with what advertising's role, so it channels us in its fruitless directions. It channels us towards the world of things. And I think the role of advertising in that sense is actually very profound in that it prevents us from thinking about what real satisfaction, what real well-being would be. In that sense, its function is analogous to the drug pusher on the street corner. We all know that products are not going to give us what we want, but advertising is there on the corner, constantly offering us another hit. Come on, one more time. We didn't offer it last time, but this time it's going to be really good. Constantly pushing us towards the world of the market, towards the world of products. And by colonizing every nook and cranny of the culture. In that sense, advertising is part of what the economist Tibor Skotowski calls the joyless economy. And that's our economy. It provides some things, but it is not, our economy does not provide pleasure. It provides comfort, but comfort is not the basis, is not pleasure. It does not provide us with real happiness. This is the great political challenge for us now, is how do we connect our real desires to a truly human world, rather than, as Marx said, to the dead world of the immense accumulation of commodities. Okay, what effect does this have? What effect does this incredible bombardment of the story into the psyches of the population have? Well, not surprisingly, it works exactly the way culture works. We start to identify with that culture. We want more and more things. We feel as though we are only defined through our relationship with products, with objects, with commodities. And again, advertisers have known this for a long time. This is a quote from a retail analyst, actually, in the 1930s, I believe. This is from Victor Lebo. He says, you should always go to the business press. They will tell you whatever you need to know about how business operates. Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and selling of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in commodities. We need things consumed, burned up, worn out, replaced, and discarded at an ever-increasing rate. That's what the function of the marketing is. This constant cycling of the immense accumulation of commodities. Juliet Shaw, in her really important book called The Overspent American, delves into the effects that this obsession with goods has had on the lives of Americans. And she argues in this, the Overspent American, Juliet Shaw argues that there's been a change in how Americans compare themselves. That there's been a change in what we regard as our reference group. Used to be, in the 1950s, that the people we looked up to kind of lived on the next street. The Joneses and the Smiths, they lived kind of next door to each other or in one street over, and the people we compared ourselves to were next up on the socio-economic ladder. Well, as a result of this bombardment over the last 50, 60 years, that has changed. Now, advertising and commercialization has pushed us and encourages us to identify with the very rich. It is what Juliet Shaw says, our reference systems have been stretched. And now our frame of reference is not the next group on the socioeconomic ladder, it is the top 20% of the population. And everyone wants now to be like the top 20% of the population, and it's what they compare themselves to. That has become normal. 85% of people would aspire to be in the top 18% of American households. Only 15% of American households said that they would be satisfied with a comfortable life. Now you put that in the context of increasing inequality of income, where the rich keep getting richer and there is a greater gap between the rich and the poor, and the effects of that are not very difficult to predict. Juliet Shaw argues three effects. She says, firstly, there's been a rise in household debt. That's one way we try and keep up. We try and keep up through debt, through credit cards. Large numbers of Americans are in credit card debt. Debt service as a percentage of disposable income now stands at something like 18%. And that's what the credit cards don't want you to pay off your balances, by the way. You know what they call people who pay off their balances and don't pay interest? They call them deadbeats. That's what if you have a credit card and you run up a balance on it and then you pay it off every month without paying interest, to the credit card companies, you're a deadbeat because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is paying interest for the rest of your life. That's what those minimum payments are. Those minimum payments is your debt service for the rest of your life. We're in debt up to our ears, and in fact, the start of the economic crisis that we're in right now started off as a problem of debt. Remember, there's a lot of talk about the subprime market. Well, that's what it was. It was from debt. Actually, American capitalism did a very interesting thing. Up until about the 1970s, early 1970s, the American working class shared in the immense productive output and the immense profits that American industry was able to produce. And so American workers had very high standards of living in the 1950s and going into the 1960s. Well, starting in the 1970s, what corporations started to do was their profits kept going up. Nothing was wrong with American workers' productivity. Their profits kept going up and wages stagnated. At the same time, workers got used to a standard of living with high wages. And so American capitalism said, okay, well, we'll give you the money to get the lifestyle you want. Instead of giving you wages, we're going to loan you the money. It's one of the great scams. It is really one of the great scams of modern society, which is why now the American working class is so much in debt. The hours of work has risen in the last 25 years. There are millions of families now have added a second earner, and Americans now work more every year, many, many more days than Europeans. Personal bankruptcies are at historic levels. The national savings rate has plummeted. Everyone else in the world saves more than we do and actually lend us money. But our savings rate is next to zero. And it is also, perhaps its most powerful kind of cultural effect, it has also had an effect on what we call the public purse and our notion of the collective. It has loosened the bonds between individuals and their community. So that people are now less connected to one another, because the market actually only talks to us as individuals. Robert Putnam, the sociologist, wrote a book outlining this, which he called Bowling Alone. And the reason he called it bowling alone was he said, people are still bowling as much as they ever did, but in the past they used to bowl together. They used to bowl in bowling leagues, etc. Now people bowl by themselves. They no longer have that social connection. We care less about society. And that shouldn't be surprising, because our commercial culture tells us there is no such thing as society. It tells us there are only individuals. It tells us there is no such thing that links us together in some kind of collective way. That we do not have collective concerns or interests. Okay, this idea that it is all about individuals, that it's not about community, it's not about the collective, it's not about what we have in common. This idea, of course, has been reinforced in the sphere of politics in the last 35 years by the triumph of what is called neoliberalism. And neoliberalism is the political expression of an unregulated market system. In fact, Margaret Thatcher, the former Conservative British Prime Minister and one of the high priestesses of neoliberalism, gave the most succinct answer to the question of society and community from the viewpoint of the market. In perhaps her most famous or infamous quote, she said, this is Margaret Thatcher, former British Prime Minister, talking about what role the market plays. She says, there is no such thing as society. There are just individuals and their families. Actually, if she really believed this, even she couldn't say, because if she said there's no such thing as society, there are just individuals, people will say, no, but I care about my family. I care about something outside of myself. And therefore she had to put the family stuff in. But this is an indication. What she's saying here is, according to Mrs. Thatcher, there is nothing solid we can call society. No group values, no collective interests. Society is just a bunch of individuals acting on their own. Indeed, that is precisely how advertising talks to us. It addresses us not as members of society talking about collective issues, but as individuals. It talks about our individual needs and desires. It does not talk about those things that we have to negotiate collectively. It does not talk about poverty. It does not talk about healthcare. It does not talk about housing. It does not talk about the homeless. It doesn't talk about the environment. The market appeals to the worst in us. Greed, selfishness. That's what a market individual is. A market individual is supposed to only concern themselves with their direct individual needs. Open up any economic textbooks, open up a business, that's the rational model of what a consumer is. It's a greedy consumer, it's a selfish consumer. That is what markets are good at. So it encourages, the market appeals to the worst in us, greed, selfishness, and discourages what is the best about us. Compassion, caring, and generosity. Again, none of this should surprise us. In those societies where the marketplace dominates, and I'm arguing for the marketplace as a cultural institution, which finds its expression in advertising, In those societies where the marketplace dominates, then what will be stressed is what the marketplace can deliver. As I said, advertising is the main voice of the marketplace. So discussions of collective issues are pushed to the margins of the culture. We can still talk about these things, we can still talk about poverty and homelessness and the environment, but they're done on the outskirts of the culture. At the heart of the culture is still the advertising vision. It's no accident that politically the market vision associated with neoconservatives and with neoliberalism has come to dominate at exactly that time when advertising has been pushing the same values into every nook and cranny of the culture. That connection between what is happening in the culture and then what is happening politically, that's no accident, the rise of both those things together. The widespread disillusionment with government, right? Government has become a dirty word. And politicians now run like the dickens from any notion that they may be part of government. Well, government is a way of thinking about ourselves in a collective way. It is the only institution, as corrupted it has become, it is the only institution that still exists where we can talk about, negotiate our collective issues. But the widespread disillusion with government has found fertile ground in the fields of commercial culture. Remember, this was Ronald Reagan's, I've quoted Margaret Thatcher, this is a political partner, Ronald Reagan, who said, government is not a solution to our problem, government is the problem. If government is the problem, then the marketplace is what will be the solution to our problems. Again, that is no accident. Unfortunately, we are now in a situation, both globally and domestically, where solutions to pressing nuclear and environmental problems will have to take a collective form. The marketplace cannot deal with the problems that face us at the turn of the millennium. The marketplace cannot deal with the major issues. It cannot deal with the threat of nuclear extermination that is still with us in the post-Cold War age. It cannot deal with climate change. It cannot deal with the depletion of our non-renewable resources. It cannot deal with the depletion of the oceans of the fish. It can't deal with the acidification of the oceans. It can't deal with the major aspect of our culture right now, in a whole host of different dimensions, is a culture of collapse. Our systems are collapsing. Our economic systems are collapsing. Our political systems are collapsing. Our environmental systems are collapsing. And that is no accident. Those things are happening together. The effects of the way we do business are no longer localized, they are now global, and we have to have international and collective ways of dealing with them. Individual action is simply, we can't afford thinking about this as only individual action. We can't afford the delusions of the marketplace. It will literally get us killed. As the environmentalist slogan once puts it, we all live downstream now. Okay, in that sense, advertising systematically relegates discussion of these key societal issues to the peripheries of the culture and talks in powerful ways instead of individual desire, of individual fantasy, of individual pleasure and comfort. Now, it's important to avoid the prediction of immediate catastrophe. We're close, but we still have some time. We still have some time to take some action. Not much, actually. We are now at that. We are at the cusp of that tipping point where we have to take action. But we have to take action now to avoid the catastrophe in the future. We have to take action now. We have to put in place the steps that will serve us in 70 years' time. Okay, the metaphor I always use to describe this is the metaphor of an oil tanker that's headed towards the shore. An oil tanker is so big, loaded down with so much weight, that if it's heading towards the shore, it has to start turning well before there seems to be any apparent danger, because it takes so long to turn. If it starts turning too late, it will crash into the shore. Well, we're on that oil tanker right now. We're heading towards the shore. And it seems like a long way away, but unless we start to turn now, we are not going to be able to avoid it. We have to make fundamental changes in the way we organize ourselves. We have to make fundamental changes in what we stress in our economy if we want to avoid that catastrophe in the future. We have to take action now. In that sense, the present population of the world, I used to say generation, but for those of us who are older in this room, this has happened on our watch. Those of us who are in our 40s and 50s and 60s, this has happened on our watch. And we have a responsibility, but as do all people right now, and as do young people. We have a unique responsibility right now. It is literally up to us to save the world, to make the changes we need to make. If we don't, we will be in barbarism and savagery towards each other very shortly. We may already be there. When you think about the Iraq War, when you think about and the incredible damage that has been done, we may already be in savagery and butchery and barbarism as an answer to these problems right now. We have to make short-term sacrifices. We especially have to rethink our relationship to transportation. We have to rethink our relationship to the car. Okay, it was fun for a while, right? But right now, it is just choking the life out of the planet. And we cannot do this individually. We have to do it collectively. We have to do it collectively. We have to find the political will somehow to do this, and we may even be dead when its real effects will be felt. We may even be dead. We've got to do something now for the future. And the question is, how do we identify with that generation in the future? How do we identify with that generation not yet even born? How do we identify that far into the future? As the political philosopher Robert Heilbronner said, there are many who would sacrifice much for their children. Fewer would do so for their grandchildren. And yet we have to form those bonds. We have to form those psychic bonds across generations. And the context within which we have to do that now is the context of advertising, is the context of commercial culture, is the context of the market, is the context of individualism, is the context where collective action is seen as weird. That's the context we have to do it within. Okay, this is the challenge. The advertising system now, okay, I've argued now advertising has been part of, it's not, obviously advertising doesn't do anything by itself. It is part of the capitalist market, of the capitalist system as a whole. But it has performed a key cultural role in pushing us towards to the edge of collapse, to the edge of collapse. But whatever we decide to do, however we think about the future, it also then provides the ground on which we have to think about the future. The context within which we have to think about the future is provided by advertising. And the time frame of advertising is very short term. Okay, I'm going to give you, this is the challenge. Okay, my challenge to you. This is the context, and you have to watch me. Right? That's the... I'm sorry. The advertising system forms, okay, this is the challenge here. I can tell you there's some really good stuff over there. It's real, it's about pleasure, it's really, really good stuff. And the more you look over there, the less you will focus here. Unfortunately, the future of the human race, not with me, but it's here. That will simply keep taking us into the culture of collapse. The time frame of advertising is very short term. It doesn't encourage us to think beyond the immediate, beyond present sensual experience. It doesn't encourage us to think about the future. And in fact, it may well be, as the advertising, as there's more and more goods are produced and there's more and more competition for our consciousness, that is going to get even better. That is going to get even more pleasurable. That is going to get even more intense. That is going to get, that is going to be, you're not even going to have to think. It's going to reach you at levels where it reaches you beyond the conscious. And it will form the ground on which then we have to think about the future. I'm going to stop this now because that's the last quote. I'll leave it there for a second. Okay, the value, that's the challenge. That's the challenge we have right now. The value of a collective social future is one that does not and will not find expression within our commercially dominated culture. Indeed, the prevailing values provide no incentive to develop bonds beyond the immediate, no incentive to develop bonds with future generations. And there's a real sense, actually, especially among young people, of kind of nihilism and despair about the future, and a closing of ranks against the outside. Actually, many people, and I was one of these, thought that the environmental crisis would be the linchpin for the lessening of international tensions. I naively thought, we're now in this together. Therefore we have to, the environmental problem, the environmental issues can only be dealt with collectively. And therefore we will come up, human beings are a rational, are a creative species, we will come up with ways of collectively dealing with these, internationally dealing with these. Instead, what I didn't really understand at that time was the power of the cultural system and the answers that it gives, and the focusing on issues of greed and violence. And that has just accelerated. Okay, getting out of the situation, coming up with new ways to look at the world. Actually, I'm very, in one sense, I'm not as, I guess, as pessimistic about this, partly because of the incredible developments that have been going on, since September in the Occupy movement. I don't know where the Occupy movement is going to go, but I do know that it's the start of something. It's going to take a long time to develop, but it is the start of something that I never thought I would see. And part of it, I think, is driven by people who realize that they have no role, they have no place within the system, within the promises that have been made. That the promises that were made to them were, in fact, a false bill of goods. And so actually, I'm more hopeful now. But we have to come up with new ways to look at the world, and will require enormous work. And one response to just may be, it's just too difficult. Let's just have a party to, the end all parties, the party at the end of the world. As Frederick Jameson, the cultural theorist, remarks, he says, it is easier for people to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. Easier to imagine the whole thing going up rather than an alternative way in which human beings could organize themselves. This is not because people are stupid or unimaginative, but because the cultural field has given them a limited set of visions to imagine the future. The alternative response to change the situation, to work for humane, collective, long-term values, will require an effort of the most immense kind. And I actually think, as I said, I think if I'd given this talk 4 months ago, I'd have a different conclusion right now. And we may actually be at the start of a different way of thinking about it. That is the political challenge. That is the political challenge of this new millennium. How to both fight against the system of values and to articulate an alternative vision of pleasure, an alternative vision of fun, an alternative vision whereby we do what we do not because we save the world, not because it's our duty to save the world, but because it's fun to save the world. That actually that engaging in political action is its own form of pleasure. As Gloria Steinem, the feminist, says, she says, feminism is what gets me out of bed in the morning. And it's that optimism, it's that, there's a very famous phrase by an Italian socialist. He was, the writer is Antonio Gramsci. Sorry, I don't have this on here, but Antonio Gramsci, who was a socialist in the 1930s in Italy during the rise of Mussolini. And in fact, he was locked up by Mussolini, locked up by the fascist government for many, many years. In fact, Mussolini said, we have to lock, or one of his prosecutors said, we have to lock this brain away. This brain is too dangerous. And when Gramsci was in this fascist prison, he kept struggling. He wrote things on, he kept philosophizing, he kept thinking about strategies for cultural change. And he wrote things on little pieces of paper in code and he smuggled them out. And in fact, what was smuggled out, what became the basis of what's called the prison notebooks of Antonio Gramsci, and is the basis for some really imaginative thinking about how cultural change happens. And that actually, when I think about this, is Gramsci in this fascist prison, and he still hasn't given up. And the phrase that Gramsci used was pessimism of the intellect. That is, if we do our work properly, of course we're going to be pessimistic. But we can't run from something just because our intellectual efforts are going to draw conclusions that are not going to be particularly, hopeful to us. That's pessimism of the intellect. And what he never lost was the second part of it. He said, optimism of the will, the desire to change the world, the desire to be active in the world, the desire not to give in, the desire always to participate, the desire to be human. And those two things, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Actually, I think if Gandhi heard those words, I think Gandhi also would, those would be a phrase that he would resonate very much with his own sense of struggle. His own sense of struggle. Over 100 years ago, Marx, I started off with Marx, I'll end with Marx. Over 100 years ago, Marx observed that there were two directions that capitalism could take: towards a democratic socialism or towards brutal barbarism. And he wasn't clear where we were going to end up. And I don't think there's anything written in stone as to where we will end up. We will end up where we struggle to end up. And at the start of the 21st century, the end of this first decade, those choices have never been starker. That actually is what is before us. That's our challenge. Thank you.